Your path leads you past closed doors of other storerooms and chambers, each sealed with heavy cedar and marked with the royal cartouche. None of these doors open, and no sound comes from behind them. You pass a small niche where a statue of the god Thoth stands in shadow, his ibis beak catching a sliver of light, and you note his presence, the way you note everything on these quiet walks, without stopping, without breaking the steady rhythm of your sandals. The corridor turns gently to the left, then straightens again, and the air becomes slightly cooler, as if you are moving deeper into the heart of the building where the sun never reaches. You arrive at the final door, the Treasury of the Pharaoh, and you can see the previous guard already there, standing motionless with his back to the wall, his spear held upright. He is a man you have seen many times, his face lined from years of service, and his eyes are calm and heavy with the long hours of his watch. As you approach, he turns his head just enough to meet your gaze, and you give him a quiet nod. He nods back, a single slow movement that says everything needed, and then he steps away from his spot, his sandals making the same soft brushing sound as he walks past you and disappears into the corridor from which you came. You listen to his footsteps fade, each one fainter than the last, until the silence closes over them completely and you are alone. You take the exact position that he left, 2 paces from the treasury door, your back against the cool limestone wall. The stone is smooth through the thin linen of your tunic, and its temperature is constant, neither cold nor warm, but something in between that you can feel as a mild pressure along your spine. You settle your weight evenly on both feet, placing the butt of your spear on the floor beside your right foot, and you let your left hand rest at your side. The spear is a familiar weight, the acacia wood polished by years of handling, and you feel its presence as an anchor, something solid in a world that is now entirely still. The corridor stretches away into darkness in both directions, a long tunnel of shadow punctuated by the one torch that burns in its iron bracket on the wall opposite the treasury door. This is your light for the night, a single flame that dances with a slow, hypnotic motion. Its glow falls on the door in front of you. A heavy panel of cedar wood reinforced with bronze bands and inlaid with thin strips of electrum that shimmer faintly. The electrum catches the torchlight in small, irregular flashes, like tiny stars embedded in the dark wood, and you let your eyes trace the patterns they make without any sense of urgency. The door is sealed with a thick cord of twisted linen that runs through a clay seal bearing the impression of the royal scarab. The seal is unbroken, as it has been for many nights, and you know that behind that cord lies the accumulation of years, gold and grain and precious stones resting in their chests and sacks. You do not think about these treasures with any desire. They are simply there, part of the quiet mass of the building, as much a part of the silence as the stone walls themselves. You are here to ensure that the seal remains untouched, until the scribes and overseers return with the morning light, and this duty is so simple that it requires no active thought. You stand and you wait, and the silence begins to settle around you like a thick linen cloth draped over your shoulders. At first you can still hear the faint echo of your own footsteps lingering in the corridor, a ghost of sound that takes several minutes to die completely. Then even that is gone, and the only thing you can hear is the very faint hiss of the torch flame as it consumes the oil-soaked reed. This sound is so quiet that you must be perfectly still to notice it, and once you do, it becomes a constant companion, a thin thread of noise that runs through the whole night without ever changing its pitch. You breathe slowly, drawing the cool air into your lungs and releasing it in a gentle stream through your nose. The air has a dry quality, slightly dusty, with the lingering scent of the oil from the torch and the faintest trace of the river mud that was used to make the bricks of the outer walls. There is no wind here, no movement of air except the tiny currents caused by the heat of the flame, and these currents are so weak that they do not even stir the hem of your kilt. You feel the stillness as a physical presence, a weight that presses gently on your skin and on your eardrums, muffling the world outside until it seems very far away. Your eyes grow accustomed to the dim light, and you begin to notice the small details of the door that you have seen many times before, but that always reveal themselves slowly, as if for the first time. The cedar planks were cut from a single great tree, and the grain of the wood runs in long, wavy lines from top to bottom, interrupted only by the bronze bands that are riveted at regular intervals. The bronze has darkened over the years to a deep brown, almost black in the shadows, but where the torchlight strikes it directly, you can see a faint reddish gleam. The electrum inlays are set into shallow channels carved into the wood, and they form the outline of a winged sun disk with two cobras facing outward, their hoods spread in eternal protection. You let your gaze move slowly across these shapes, from the tip of one wing to the curve of a cobra's neck, and then back again, a calm journey that takes you nowhere but fills the time without effort. Above the door, carved into the limestone lintel, are the hieroglyphs that spell out the name of the Pharaoh, and the titles that proclaim him Lord of the Two Lands, beloved of Amun, giver of life. You have seen these symbols so often that you know their shapes by heart: the oval of the cartouche, the curved beak of the vulture, the straight lines of the reed and the water. In the flickering light, they seem to move slightly, a trick of shadow and flame that makes the stone feel almost alive, though you know it is only your eyes playing the same gentle game they play every night. You do not read the hieroglyphs in the way a scribe would, sounding out the words, but you feel their meaning as a kind of weight, an authority that rests in the very stone. The floor beneath your feet is made of the same limestone as the walls, and it is worn smooth in the center of the corridor from the passage of countless sandals over the centuries. Near the walls, where few people walk, the stone retains a slightly rougher texture, and you can see the faint marks of the original chisels that shaped it. There is a small dip in the floor just to the right of the threshold, a shallow depression that might have been caused by a dropped tool or a flaw in the stone, and you find yourself looking at it now and then, noting its position the way you might note a familiar landmark on a long journey. This dip is part of your landscape, something to anchor your awareness when your mind begins to drift. Time passes, though you do not measure it. You are not required to count the hours. The night will end when the first grey light seeps into the corridor through the high ventilation shafts, and until then you have nothing to do but remain in place. Your body settles into the stance of the guard, a posture that you learned long ago and that now feels as natural as breathing. Your knees are slightly bent, your shoulders relaxed, your hands resting easily on the spear shaft. You do not fight the silence or try to fill it with thoughts. Instead, you let it fill you, a slow seepage of quiet that enters through your ears and your skin and your very breath. Sometimes you shift your weight from one leg to the other, a slow movement that takes many seconds to complete. You do this without thinking, responding to the subtle signals of your body, and each shift is followed by a long period of absolute stillness. The leather straps of your sandals creak faintly when you move, a tiny sound that is immediately swallowed by the larger silence, and then all is quiet again. You notice the way the torchlight flickers across the surface of the door, and you notice the way the shadows deepen in the corners of the corridor, and you notice the way your own breathing has become so shallow and regular that it seems to be part of the building's own respiration. The sealed room behind the door is completely silent. Not even the scuttle of a mouse or the settling of a timber disturbs the perfect stillness that emanates from within. You imagine, without any particular effort, the interior of the Treasury as a vast, dark space where the treasures rest in their appointed places, each chest and sack exactly where the scribes left them. The gold does not gleam because there is no light to strike it. The linen does not stir because there is no breeze. The grain does not shift because nothing disturbs it. This image is not a product of longing or curiosity, but simply a fact of the night, a calm understanding that the world on the other side of the door is as motionless as the world on your side. Your spear, standing upright beside you, casts a long shadow that stretches across the corridor and climbs the opposite wall. The shadow is thin and straight, a dark line that wavers only slightly when the flame wavers, and you find yourself watching it from the corner of your eye without turning your head. The shadow is a companion of sorts, a silent partner that mirrors your own stillness, and you are vaguely aware that its angle will change as the torch burns lower, shifting by tiny increments over the course of the night. This slow change is one of the few visible signs of time's passage, and you accept it as a quiet marker in a world without clocks. The corridor behind you, the way you came, is a deep well of darkness that fades into a point where even the dim torchlight cannot reach. If you turn your head and look down that length of stone, you see only a gradual transition from faint orange glow to absolute black, a gradient that seems to pull the eye into an infinite distance. There is nothing there to see, no movement, no sound, and after a moment you return your gaze to the door, because that is where your duty lies, directly in front of you. The other direction, past the door and continuing deeper into the palace, is equally dark, equally silent and equally empty, and you give it the same brief glance before settling back into your forward-facing watch. You think of the previous guard, the man who walked away into that darkness, and you know that he is now making his way through the same corridors you walked, perhaps passing other guards at their posts, perhaps reaching his small sleeping chamber, where he will lie down on a straw mattress and close his eyes. You do not envy him because envy is an active emotion, something sharp and hot, and the quiet of the night has smoothed away all sharp edges. You simply note his absence as you note your own presence. Two facts of the same simple reality, and then you let the thought go. The air grows fractionally cooler as the hours creep forward, and you feel the change on the skin of your arms and your face. The linen of your tunic, which was comfortable when you arrived, now feels slightly cool against your chest, and you are aware of the way the fabric moves when you breathe, a gentle rise and fall that is the only visible motion in the entire corridor. Your body continues its quiet work, heart beating at a steady pace, lungs expanding and contracting, muscles holding you upright without strain, and you let all of this happen without interference, a silent machine of flesh and bone operating in the dark. You listen to the silence with the same attention you might give to a piece of music, though there is no melody, only the soft drone of the torch and the distant, almost imaginary hum of the river, that you cannot truly hear, but that you know is there, far beyond the palace walls. The river is the reason the palace exists, the reason the grain and the gold are stored in this room, the reason you stand here tonight, but it is so remote right now that it might as well be a dream. The only water you can perceive is the thin layer of moisture that the cool stone draws from the air, a faint dampness on the surface of the limestone that you can feel when you touch the wall with your fingertips. You do not sleep because sleeping is not your duty, but your mind drifts into a state that is not quite waking and not quite dreaming, a calm plateau where thoughts pass like clouds across a very distant sky. A memory of the river might surface, a flash of sun on water, but it is gone before you can hold it, replaced by the immediate reality of the door, the torch, the shadow, the stone. You let these thoughts come and go without attachment, knowing that they are just the mind's way of occupying itself during the long stillness, and you find that the less you cling to them, the more peaceful they become. The torch burns with its steady flame, and the oil in the reed slowly diminishes, though the change is so gradual that you cannot see it happening. The flame itself is a complex thing, a tongue of gold with a pale blue base and a core of darker orange, and it dances not wildly, but with a restrained, rhythmic motion, like a dancer moving through a well-practiced routine. You watch the flame, and you see the tiny threads of soot that rise from its tip, curling upward into the darkness, disappearing into the high ceiling that you cannot see. These threads are delicate and evanescent, and you follow their brief journey with your eyes, one after another, until your attention blurs and you are simply looking without focusing. You are aware that the night is very long, but this awareness does not trouble you. Longness is not something to be endured, but something to be inhabited, a vast quiet room in which you are the only occupant, and you stretch out into it the way a cat stretches out in a patch of sun. There is no loneliness here, because the silence is full, and the door is solid and the spear is firm in your hand. The world has contracted to this one corridor, this one patch of light, this one slow breath after another, and everything beyond that is a distant abstraction, as unreal as the lands beyond the cataract or the sea that you have heard about but never seen. Your eyes, half-lidded now, continue to trace the familiar lines of the door, the bronze bands, the electrum wings, the seal, the hieroglyphs, and each circuit brings you back to the same quiet center. The corridor does not change. The torch does not go out. The sealed room behind you does not open. You stand exactly where you are supposed to stand, doing exactly what you are supposed to do, and the weight of this simple purpose settles over you like a second layer of linen, warm and reassuring and endlessly calm. The night advances without sound, without event, without any marker except the infinitesimal shift of the shadows on the wall and the slow cooling of the stone at your back. You have arrived at the Treasury door, and you have begun your watch, and now you simply wait, dissolving gently into the stillness that will last until dawn. The stone beneath your feet has been there for longer than any living memory, laid by craftsmen whose names are now forgotten, their hands turned to dust, their tools long since melted down or buried in the sand. You stand on this stone as gods have stood before you, night after night, century after century, and the limestone has accepted the weight of all those bodies without complaint, without shifting, without any sign of wear, except the subtle polishing that comes from the brush of countless sandals. You feel the floor through the thin soles of your own sandals, a pair of woven reed shoes that separate your skin from the rock by only a finger's width of fiber, and through this barrier you sense the coolness rising, a steady, gentle chill that is the natural temperature of deep stone untouched by the sun. The limestone blocks are fitted together with a precision that still astonishes the few who notice, the joints so tight that a knife blade cannot be slipped between them, the edges so straight that they seem to have been cut by a single unerring stroke of a divine chisel. You look down at these joints now, the torchlight casting a shallow shadow along each line, and you see that they have not separated or crumbled, despite the passing of ages. The mortar, if there ever was any, is invisible, hidden deep within the seam where it binds block to block, with a grip that has never loosened, and the surface of the floor appears as one continuous expanse of pale creamstone, marked only by the faintest variations in color where one block meets another. The coolness of the stone is a constant presence, a sensation that you notice more acutely when you shift your weight from one foot to the other. A slow, deliberate movement that you perform every so often without thinking. When you lift one foot slightly, the sole of your sandal loses contact with the floor for a moment, and the skin beneath feels the air, which is warmer than the stone, creating a brief contrast that reminds you just how chilled the limestone truly is. Then you settle your foot back down, and the coolness returns, spreading through the reed fibers and into the arch of your foot, a steady, soothing cold that seems to anchor you to the floor and, through the floor, to the entire mass of the palace. You have learned the floor of this corridor as a blind man learns a familiar room, not by sight but by subtle pressure and texture and the memory of slight irregularities. There is a tiny dip in the stone just to the right of the threshold, a shallow concavity no wider than your palm and no deeper than the thickness of a finger joint, which you discovered one night long ago when your sandal caught on its edge. Now you know exactly where it is, and when you stand in your usual position 2 paces from the door, your right foot is positioned just to the side of this dip so that you do not step into it unless you mean to. The dip is a flaw, perhaps where a fossil fell out of the limestone as it was being polished, or where a tool slipped during the final dressing of the block, and you find it oddly comforting, a small imperfection in a world of otherwise perfect order. The crack that runs diagonally from the wall to the center of the corridor is the most prominent feature of the floor, a fine dark line that catches the torchlight as a thin shadow. You have traced this crack with your eyes more times than you can count, following its path as it starts near the base of the wall on your left, about ankle height, and then angles across the stone, widening slightly in the middle before tapering to nothing just before it reaches the center line of the passage. The crack is not a sign of weakness, the overseers have said, but the natural result of the building settling over millennia, the immense weight of the upper floors compressing the foundation and causing the stone to adjust in the only way it can, by cracking along a line of least resistance. The crack is old, its edges worn smooth by the passage of feet, and small particles of dust and sand have collected in its groove, a fine grey line that looks like a tiny dry riverbed seen from a great height. When the torchlight flickers, the crack seems to move, the shadow inside it shifting from one side to the other as the flame bends, and this small illusion of motion can hold your attention for many minutes at a time. You watch the darkness within the crack deepen and lighten, a slow pulse that matches the flicker of the fire, and you think about how this tiny crevice contains its own tiny world. A miniature valley where motes of dust settle like boulders and the occasional ant might wander, though you have never seen one here, lost and seeking a way back to the surface. The crack is a reminder that even stone, the most solid and permanent of materials, is subject to the slow forces of time and weight, and the patient gravity that pulls everything downward, eventually toward the earth from which it came. The surface of the limestone is not uniform, though it appears so from a distance. When you look closely, you can see the fine grain of the stone, a subtle pattern of tiny speckles and faint swirls that are the fossilized remains of ancient sea creatures, shells and corals and microscopic organisms that lived and died in a warm ocean that covered this land millions of years before the first Pharaoh built his first mud brick tomb. These fossils are small, some no larger than a grain of sand, and they catch the light in a way that the surrounding stone does not, appearing as tiny white specks embedded in the pale matrix. You have spent many hours letting your eyes wander over these specks, identifying the spiral of a snail shell here, the fan shape of a coral there, a catalogue of extinct life pressed into the floor and polished to a smooth finish. Near the walls, where few people walk, the stone retains a slightly rougher texture, the original chisel marks still visible as shallow parallel grooves that run in the direction of the block's length. These marks were made by the masons who shaped the limestone with copper tools, striking the stone in a steady rhythm, each blow removing a small amount of material, and you can almost hear the echo of that long-ago work if you listen closely enough, the tap, tap, tap of hammers that have been silent for 3,000 years. The marks are a record of the labor that built this palace, the countless hours of cutting and dragging and lifting and setting, all performed by men who are now as much a part of the stone as the fossils themselves, their sweat and their breath and their very atoms absorbed into the walls and floors they created. The central part of the corridor, where the traffic has been heaviest over the centuries, is worn to a high polish, the stone reflecting the torchlight with a soft gleam that looks almost wet. This polished path is slightly concave, a shallow trough that runs down the middle of the passage from the far darkness all the way to the Treasury door, and it is the product of generations of feet, sandals and bare soles alike, rubbing against the limestone with a friction so gentle that it has taken centuries to produce a visible effect. You stand to the side of this path, not in it, so your presence does not add to the wear, but you can see the way the light slides along its surface, a continuous band of faint shine that marks the route of everyone who has ever walked this way. The floor is coolest in the early hours of the night, before the heat of the day has had a chance to penetrate through the thick outer walls and travel downward to this deep interior chamber. By midnight, the stone reaches a temperature that is as cold as it will ever get, a deep, settled chill that seems to come from the very heart of the earth, and you feel this chill not only through your feet, but also radiating upward against your ankles and calves, a faint sensation that you can detect if you stand perfectly still and pay attention. This cold is not unpleasant. It is the natural cold of the underworld, the coolness of tombs and caves and deep cellars, and it carries with it a sense of permanence, a reminder that beneath the warm surface of the world there is a vast realm of stone that never sees the sun and never changes its temperature. The individual blocks of the floor are not all the same size, though they were cut with great precision. Near the threshold, the blocks are slightly larger, perhaps as wide as your outstretched arms, while farther down the corridor they become gradually smaller, a detail that you noticed only after many nights of observation, and that serves no practical purpose that you can discern, but adds to the quiet complexity of the floor, a subtle variation in the rhythm of the joints that your eyes can follow, like the measures of a silent song. The joints themselves are not perfectly straight over long distances. If you sight along the floor like a builder checking a wall, you can detect a very slight wave in the line of one joint, a gentle curve of perhaps a finger's width, that must have been the result of a minor error in the original layout, corrected so skillfully that it is almost invisible, a testament to the patience and care of those ancient masons. Your sandals, woven from papyrus reeds, have thin soles that allow you to feel the texture of the stone in considerable detail, the smooth polish of the worn areas, the slight grain of the less traveled zones, the sharp edge of the crack when you deliberately place your toe near it. The reeds themselves are stiff and fibrous, and they make a soft rustling sound when you shift your weight, a sound so quiet that it is barely audible even in this profound silence. But it is there, a tiny reminder of the plant life of the riverbank. The tall green papyrus stalks swaying in the breeze, now dried and woven and pressed into service under your feet, connecting you to the living world outside even as you stand motionless in the dead heart of the palace. You sometimes press down gently with your toes, feeling the stone resist with its absolute solidity, a sensation that is almost philosophical in its implications, the encounter of living flesh with inert mineral, the temporary with the eternal. The stone does not yield, does not compress, does not acknowledge your presence in any way except to support you, and this indifference is not hostile, but simply factual, a statement of the nature of things that you find oddly reassuring. No matter what happens in the world of men, the stone will remain, cool and hard and patient, waiting out the centuries with the same silent endurance it has always shown. The torchlight plays across the floor in slow, shifting patterns, the flame's slight movement causing the shadows to sway and the highlights to drift, and this constant, gentle motion makes the stone seem almost alive, as if it were breathing in its sleep. The shadows of the electrum strips on the door fall across the floor in long, thin lines that tremble with the flame, and the shadow of your own spear stretches out to join them, a dark stripe that moves when you move, connecting your body to the far wall in a line of darkness. You watch these shadows with a calm attention, seeing how they darken the cracks and the joints, how they pool in the shallow dip, how they make the polished central path gleam even brighter by contrast, and you let these observations fill your mind without any need to act on them, a pure passive awareness that is as restful as sleep itself. The stone walls that rise from the floor are made of the same limestone, and they share the same cool temperature and the same fine grain, but they have their own character, their own history of chisel marks and polishing, and the occasional hieroglyph that records the name of a pharaoh or a god. The transition from floor to wall is a sharp right angle, a clean seam where the horizontal meets the vertical, and this seam is as tight as all the others, a precise meeting of planes that leaves no gap for dust to collect or for small creatures to enter. You have examined this corner many times, noting the way the light catches the edge and splits into two different shades of cream. The floor slightly darker because of the wear, the wall slightly lighter because it has been less touched, and this small difference in tone is another of those quiet details that fill the long night. The entire corridor, from the Treasury door to the distant bend where you first entered, is a single coherent work of stone, a tunnel carved through the mass of the palace and lined with these immaculate blocks, and you are standing in the middle of it, a living thing surrounded by geology and architecture, your warm body and your slow heartbeat a small island of life in a sea of cold mineral. The floor supports you, the walls enclose you, the ceiling hides above you in the darkness, and you feel a kinship with the stone, a sense of shared stillness that makes the long hours of the watch not a burden, but a kind of meditation, a resting of the mind on the solid, the unchanging, the silent. You bend your knees slightly, not enough to change your stance, but just enough to feel the floor press back against your weight with its unyielding strength, and you are aware of the complex engineering that transfers your body's load through the thin soles of your sandals into the limestone block, through that block into the next, and so on down through the foundations and into the bedrock that underlies the entire palace, a column of force that travels all the way to the center of the earth and is absorbed without effect. You are a small weight on a vast structure, a drop of water on an endless plain of stone. And this thought does not make you feel insignificant, but rather connected, part of a system that stretches from the tip of your spear to the core of the world. The stone beneath your feet has witnessed the passing of dynasties, the rise and fall of kings, the flooding of the river and the baking of the sun, and it has remained unchanged through all of it, a silent observer that asks no questions and offers no answers. You stand on this witness now, and you add your own quiet hours to its long memory, your stillness blending with its stillness, your patience matching its patience, until the boundary between guard and floor becomes as thin as the reed fibers under your feet, and you are not so much standing on the stone as being a part of it, a breathing extension of the mineral kingdom, at peace in the cool dark of the Pharaoh's corridor. Your attention, which has been resting on the stone floor and its cool solidity, now drifts upward without any conscious decision, drawn by the gentle pull of the only light source in the corridor, the torch that burns in its iron bracket on the wall opposite the Treasury door. This torch has been your companion through every watch, a small sun in the underground darkness, and its presence is so constant that you sometimes forget it is there until you deliberately turn your mind toward it. The bracket is set into the limestone at about the height of your shoulder, a simple iron ring with a flat base and two curved arms that cradle the reed stalk, and it is darkened by years of soot and oil smoke to a deep matte black that absorbs light rather than reflecting it. The iron was forged in a workshop somewhere near the river, heated and hammered and quenched, and now it rests here in the cool dark, holding the fire that it was made to hold, performing its duty without complaint for longer than anyone can remember. The torch itself is a thick stalk of river reed, perhaps as long as your forearm, that has been soaked in oil for many days before being placed in the bracket. The reed is a natural tube with a pithy core that draws the oil upward from the reservoir at its base through a process that you do not need to understand, a quiet capillary action that works as surely as the river flows. The lower portion of the reed, where it sits in the small clay cup that holds the reserve of oil, is dark and saturated, gleaming wetly in the firelight, while the upper portion, above the flame, is charred and blackened and slowly consumed by the heat, turning into a fine grey ash that crumbles away at the tip. The transition between the wet dark base and the burning tip is marked by the flame itself, a living boundary where the oil becomes fire and the fire becomes light, and you watch this boundary with a calm, unhurried interest. The flame is a steady tongue of gold and pale blue, and its shape is not fixed but gently flowing, like a slow-motion fountain of light that rises from the reed and spreads outward at the top before dissolving into nothing. The base of the flame, nearest the reed, is a clear blue that is almost transparent, a delicate curve of cool color that hugs the stalk and vibrates with a rapid invisible quiver. Above this blue zone, the flame turns gold, a warm, rich yellow that deepens to orange at its very edges, and it is in this gold region that the brightest light is produced, the light that falls on the door and the floor and your own still face. The tip of the flame flickers slightly, a small wavering motion that is more like a breathing than a dancing, a gentle rise and fall of brightness that repeats in a rhythm too slow to be counted. You can hear the flame if you listen closely, a very faint hissing sound that is the song of the oil being drawn up through the reed and vaporized by the heat. This sound is thin and continuous, a tiny whisper that underlies all the other silences of the corridor, and it is so constant that you might almost believe it is the sound of your own blood moving in your ears. The hiss is accompanied by an occasional soft pop, a minuscule bubble of gas escaping from some irregularity in the reed, and these pops are so infrequent and so quiet that you sometimes go an entire watch without noticing one, though when one does occur, it registers as a small, pleasant surprise, a reminder that the torch is a living thing with its own small voice. Tiny particles of soot rise from the tip of the flame, thin black threads that curl upward into the darkness above, and you watch them drift with the slow, aimless motion of smoke in still air. The soot particles are so fine that they are almost invisible against the dark ceiling, but when they pass through the brightest part of the flame's glow, they catch the light and become tiny glowing embers, brief stars that flare for a fraction of a second and then vanish into the shadow. You follow their ascent with your eyes, tracking one particle after another, and each one takes a slightly different path, wandering left or right according to the microscopic currents of air that your own body heat creates. The soot eventually deposits itself on the ceiling and the upper walls, a thin layer of black that has been building for centuries, and this layer is so thick now that the original color of the limestone is completely obscured, replaced by a deep, velvety darkness that absorbs the light and gives nothing back. The ceiling above the torch is lost in this darkness, a void that the flame cannot reach, and you have never seen the stone that closes over your head. You know it is there because the palace has a roof, because the rooms above this corridor have floors, but for all your senses can tell, the space above the torch might extend upward forever, a vertical tunnel of shadow that goes on and on without end. This thought does not disturb you. It simply adds to the sense of enclosure, the feeling that you are at the bottom of a deep well of quiet, and the torch is your small campfire at the bottom, keeping you company through the long night. The light from the torch falls on the doorframe of the Treasury, illuminating the hieroglyphs that are carved into the limestone, with a clarity that shifts and wavers as the flame moves. These symbols, which you know so well, are deep incisions in the stone, each one cut with a copper chisel and then filled with a blue pigment made from ground lapis lazuli, though most of the pigment has flaked away over the years and only faint traces remain in the deepest parts of the grooves. The hieroglyphs spell out the name of the Pharaoh, the titles of the Treasury, the prayers for eternal protection, and they are arranged in vertical columns that read from top to bottom, the way water falls. In the steady part of the light, the symbols are sharp and clear, each owl and reed and basket distinct, but in the flickering part, near the edges of the flame's reach, the symbols seem to move, their outlines trembling as if the stone itself were breathing. You let your eyes drift across these symbols in a slow, wandering path, starting with the oval cartouche that encloses the royal name. Inside the cartouche, the signs are arranged with a careful symmetry, the scarab beetle at the center, the sun disk above it, the plural strokes below, and each sign carries a meaning that you have been told, but that you do not actively recall, the way you know the meaning of a familiar face, without listing its features. The cartouche is surrounded by the outstretched wings of the vulture goddess, her feathers carved in overlapping rows that catch the light in a series of fine parallel lines, and you follow these lines from the tip of one wing to the curve of the other, noting how the shadow deepens in the crevices and lightens on the raised surfaces. Next to the cartouche, the symbols for gold are carved, a simple shape like a collar with dangling beads, and you look at this sign for a long time because it represents the contents of the room behind you, the metal that sleeps in its chests and never sees the sun. The sign for seal is nearby, a cylinder with a loop of cord, and this too is appropriate for a treasury, a reminder that the door is bound with the royal cord and the unbroken clay impression. Other signs follow: the sign for house, the sign for eternal, the sign for protection, which is a Shen ring, a loop of rope with no beginning and no end, and you trace its oval curve with your eyes, going around and around in a gentle, never-ending circuit that matches the circular nature of the watch itself. The electrum inlays on the cedar door also catch the torchlight, the thin strips of pale gold metal gleaming softly against the dark wood, and the reflection of the flame on these strips creates tiny points of light that dance in the corner of your vision. Electrum is a natural alloy of gold and silver, and its color is a pale greenish yellow that is cooler than pure gold, more like the light of the moon than the sun, though you have never made this comparison because you have not thought of it in those terms. You simply notice the way the metal shines, the way its brightness changes as the flame flickers, the way the reflected light falls on the adjacent parts of the door, and creates secondary shadows that are softer and more diffuse than the primary shadows cast by the torch directly. The bronze bands on the door, which are darker and warmer in tone than the electrum, also respond to the light, their surfaces glowing with a deep reddish-brown luster that is almost like the color of dried blood, though the comparison does not occur to you in any alarming way, only as a quiet observation of hue and saturation. The rivets that hold the bronze bands to the wood are rounded and smooth, and each one catches a dot of light on its highest point, a tiny highlight that makes the rivet look like a miniature dome, a row of small silent sentinels standing guard alongside you. The torch flame, as you continue to watch it, reveals its inner structure in the moments when the flickering steadies and the fire burns with a rare, perfect stillness. During these moments, which last only a few heartbeats before the small motion returns, you can see the layers of the flame as distinct regions. The dark core right above the reed where the oil vapor has not yet ignited, the blue mantle that surrounds the core and burns the fuel completely, and the outer yellow envelope where the heat meets the air and the carbon particles glow with the same incandescence as a piece of metal in a forge. These layers are not sharply divided, but blend into one another like the colors of the sky at dusk, a continuous gradient of temperature and chemistry that you perceive as a unified whole, even as you separate it in your mind. The heat of the torch is noticeable only when you hold your hand very close to the flame, which you do not do because your duty requires you to stand 2 paces back and remain still, but you can feel the warmth on your face as a faint, gentle pressure, a sensation that is more like the memory of sunlight than the reality. The warmth is uneven, pulsing slightly with the flickers, and it reaches your cheeks and your forehead with a softness that is almost caressing, a comforting touch in the otherwise cool air of the corridor. You do not lean into it or seek it out. You simply accept it as part of the environment, one more sensory detail in a night full of sensory details, and you let it wash over you without reaction. The oil that fuels the torch has a smell, a faint sweet odor that is slightly nutty and slightly acrid, the smell of pressed seeds and slow burning, and this odor has seeped into the stone and the wood and the very fabric of your tunic over many watches. You have become so accustomed to it that you rarely notice it unless you deliberately draw a deep breath through your nose, and when you do, the scent is a complex thing, layered with the dry dust of the corridor and the cool mineral tang of the limestone, and the faint, almost imperceptible fragrance of the river mud that was used to seal the bricks of the outer walls. The smell is not unpleasant. It is the smell of your duty, the smell of the night watch, and it has become as familiar as the weight of the spear in your hand. The torch bracket, which you have ignored for a while, now draws your attention again, and you notice the way the iron has been shaped, the simple curves of the arms that hold the reed, the small lip at the base that prevents the torch from slipping, the dark patina of age that covers every surface. The bracket is fixed to the wall with 2 bronze pins that have been driven deep into the limestone, and around these pins the stone is slightly cracked, tiny radial fissures that spread outward like the rays of a miniature sun caused by the expansion of the metal over countless cycles of heating and cooling. These cracks are so small that they are barely visible, and you have to look very closely to see them, which you do now, leaning forward just a fraction without moving your feet, until you can make out the fine network of lines that radiates from each pin. The shadow of the bracket on the wall behind it is a distorted version of its shape, stretched and blurred by the proximity of the flame, and you watch this shadow move in tandem with the flickers, its edges softening and sharpening, in a slow, rhythmic cycle. The shadow of the torch itself, projected onto the door and the floor, is a long wavering stripe of darkness that connects the bracket to the ground, and this shadow too is alive with the small motion of the fire, bending and straightening like a reed in a slow current of water. You are part of this shadow play as well, your own shadow falling across the corridor and up the opposite wall, and when you shift your weight minutely, your shadow shifts too, a dark companion that moves when you move and is still when you are still. The hieroglyphs, illuminated by the torch, continue to hold your gaze, and you return to them again and again, not because you are trying to read them, but because they offer a gentle occupation for your eyes, a landscape of shapes that you can explore without tiring. The sign for eternal, the Shenring, is particularly soothing to look at. Its perfect circle of rope with a small cross at the base, and you find yourself tracing its circumference with your eyes, around and around, a slow circular journey that has no beginning and no end, like the watch itself, like the night, like the repetition of the days and the seasons and the flooding of the river. This circle is a symbol of everything that is constant, and you feel a quiet kinship with it, standing here as you do, night after night, in the same spot, watching the same flame, listening to the same silence. The torch will burn for many hours yet before it needs to be replaced, and you know that its slow consumption is the only measure of time that matters in this place. The oil level in the reservoir cup will drop by a finger's width, then 2, and the flame will begin to shrink and turn a deeper orange, and then you will perform the simple ritual of replacing the old reed with a new one, a task so familiar that you do it without thinking, a small break in the stillness that passes as quietly as a cloud across the moon. But that is still far off, and for now the torch burns with a steady, youthful vigor, its light filling the corridor with a warm golden glow that makes the limestone seem almost soft, almost warm, almost alive. You settle deeper into your stance, your weight evenly on both feet, your hands resting lightly on the spear shaft, and you let the torch be your focus for an indefinite time, a quiet anchor in the sea of shadow. The flame continues its slow, hypnotic dance, the hiss continues its quiet song, and the soot continues its patient ascent into the dark ceiling, and you watch all of this with an attention that is relaxed but complete, a calm awareness that fills the present moment and leaves no room for anything else. The torch burns, and you watch, and the night moves on in its silent, unhurried way, and everything is exactly as it should be. The night has taught you a truth that you would never have learned in the daylight, a truth so simple that it can only be understood through long and patient listening. Silence is not one thing but many, a family of quietnesses that each have their own character, their own weight, their own texture against the ear. Over the countless hours of your watch, you have come to know these different silences, the way a farmer knows the different soils of his fields, and you have arranged them in your mind as a kind of inventory, a calm catalogue of the quiet that surrounds you. This catalogue is not written down, for you are not a scribe, but it is as real to you as the spear in your hand, and you can turn its pages at will, examining each entry with the same patient attention you give to the grain of the wood or the flicker of the flame. The first and deepest silence in your catalogue is the silence of the sealed treasury room behind you, the dense, heavy quiet that emanates from behind the cedar door like a cold draught from a tomb. This silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a positive presence, a thick, almost solid stillness that presses outward against the door and the walls and the electrum seal. You imagine, without any sense of unease, the treasures resting in that dark space, wrapped in their own smaller silences, the gold bars nestled against one another without a clink, the linen bales absorbing any vibration, the grain sacks so tightly packed that not a single kernel can shift to make a rustle. The treasury silence is a silence of preservation, the perfect stillness required to keep things exactly as they are, untouched and unchanged, and it has a quality of great age, as if the room itself has forgotten what sound is. This treasury silence extends through the stone walls and the thick door, reaching you as a faint pressure on your eardrums, a subtle sense of density in the air near the threshold. When you stand very still and hold your breath for a moment, you can almost feel it, a gentle weight that is not a sound but the absence of all sound, so complete that it becomes a sensation in its own right, like the pressure you feel when you dive deep into the river and the water closes over your head. This silence is not hostile or threatening, it is simply the silence of deep sleep, the silence of objects that have not moved for decades and have no intention of moving, and it invites you to share its stillness, to become as motionless as the gold and the grain. Next in your mental catalogue is the silence of the corridor itself, a long, hollow stillness that stretches away into the darkness in both directions. This corridor silence is different from the treasury silence, because it is open rather than enclosed, a tube of quiet air that connects your post to the rest of the sleeping palace, and it has a faint echoic quality, a sense of spaciousness that your ears can detect, even though no sound bounces off its walls. If you were to cough softly, the sound would travel down the corridor and return as a ghostly whisper. But you do not cough, and so the corridor remains silent, a pipe organ that never plays a note, waiting for a breath that never comes. The corridor silence is broken only by the thin whisper of the torch, which is so constant and so soft that it has become part of the silence rather than an interruption of it, the way the texture of a linen cloth is part of the cloth and not a flaw. You have come to think of the torch's hiss as the voice of the corridor itself, a tiny steady exhalation that makes the larger silence around it more audible by contrast, like the single star that reveals the depth of the night sky. The whisper does not disturb the quiet, but deepens it, giving it a reference point, a baseline of faint sound against which the absence of all other sounds can be measured, and you find this arrangement profoundly restful. Beyond the corridor, separated from you by many walls and many closed doors, lies the silence of the outer palace, the great complex of chambers and halls and courtyards that are now as dark and still as a necropolis. The palace silence is a composite thing made of many smaller silences stacked together like the bricks of a wall. The kitchens, where the fires have died to cold ash and the cooks sleep on their mats, hold the silence of dormant hearths, a quiet tinged with a faint memory of smoke. The storerooms filled with jars of oil and wine and dried fish hold the silence of sealed containers, each clay lid a mute mouth that will not speak until morning. The audience hall, where the Pharaoh's throne sits empty under its gilded canopy, holds a grand echoing silence, a ceremonial quiet that is almost architectural in its proportions, stretching from the high painted ceiling to the polished stone floor without a single voice to fill it. And the sleeping chambers, where the servants and the scribes and the lesser officials rest on their pallets, hold the soft silence of breathing, a collective, rhythmic quiet that you cannot hear but that you know is there, a gentle tide of respiration moving through the dark rooms. All of these palace silences are gathered together and held in suspension around you, and though you cannot directly perceive them from your post, you can sense their presence as a vast, quiet background, a mural of stillness that extends in every direction beyond the limestone walls. This knowledge is not a thought that you actively think, but a feeling that you carry, a sense of the whole sleeping building as a single silent organism, with you as one small cell in its quiet body. Farther out still, beyond the palace walls and the mud-brick outer fortifications, the world of nature adds its own silences to the catalogue. The river, the great Nile that flows without cease through the land, is silent from your post, its deep waters moving past the stone embankments without a sound that can penetrate the thick walls. You know the river is there because you have seen it in the daylight, a broad expanse of dark water that shines like hammered metal under the sun. But at night it becomes a silent companion, a presence that you feel rather than hear. The river's silence is a moving silence, the quiet of a current that slides past submerged stones and old roots without a splash, and it carries with it the silt of the highlands and the reflection of the unseen stars, all in perfect, soundless procession. Along the riverbanks, the palm trees stand in rows, their fronds drooping in the still night air, and these trees hold a silence of their own, a vegetative quiet that is completely different from the mineral silence of the stone. The palm fronds do not rustle because there is no breeze to stir them, and so they hang motionless, their long leaves overlapping in a dark, jagged silhouette against the slightly paler darkness of the sky. You imagine their stillness as a kind of held breath, the trees waiting for the dawn wind to release them from their nocturnal trance, and this image merges with the other silences in your catalogue, a green thread woven into the tapestry of the night. Beyond the cultivated riverbanks, the desert stretches away to the horizon, a vast plain of sand and rock and dry gravel that is the original silence from which all other silences are derived. The desert silence is an absolute, a silence that has existed since the beginning of the world and will exist after everything else is gone, a silence so profound that it can swallow thunder and leave no trace. You have never been deep into the desert, but you have heard stories of its quiet from travelers and traders, and you can almost feel it pressing in from the edges of the land, a great ocean of stillness that surrounds the narrow green strip of the river valley and waits patiently for the day when the river will shift its course and the fields will turn to sand. This desert silence is not something you fear, it is simply the outermost layer of your catalogue, the silence that contains all the others, the final boundary of the quiet world. Turning your catalogue inward, you find the silence of your own body, a small, intimate quiet that you carry with you wherever you go. Your body is not truly silent, of course, for the processes of life continue even in stillness, but the sounds it makes are so faint that they are almost inaudible. A private symphony played at the very edge of hearing. You breathe, and the air passes through your nostrils with a sound like the distant sigh of wind over sand, a sound so quiet that you must stop paying attention to all other things in order to notice it. Your heart beats, a steady, muffled thump that you can feel more than you can hear, a rhythm transmitted through the blood and the bone rather than the air. When you swallow, the tiny click of your throat is a sound that only you can perceive, a soft, moist interior noise that is as private as a thought. The silence of your body is also the silence of your stillness, the absence of all the small habitual movements that people make without thinking, the scratching of an itch, the shifting of weight, the tapping of fingers. You have trained yourself, over many watches, to suppress these movements, to become as motionless as the statue of Thoth in the niche, and the result is a bodily silence that approaches the silence of the stone itself, a quiet so complete that even the rustle of your linen tunic has ceased, the fabric hanging motionless against your skin as if it were part of you. Your speech, too, is silent, not because you are holding words back, but because there are no words to hold, your mind having entered a state where language is unnecessary, a quiet pool where thoughts drift without needing names. You could speak if you wanted to, could whisper a prayer or a name or a fragment of an old song, but you do not want to, because speech would break the spell, would tear the delicate fabric of the silence that you have so carefully woven around yourself. And so you remain silent, adding your own small quiet to the great quiet of the night, a single note in a chord of stillness that has been sounding for hours. The silences in your catalogue are not separate but interwoven, each one blending into the others at the edges, and you have learned to perceive them as a single, layered whole, a structure of quiet that rises from the deep foundation of the Treasury room, through the middle floors of the corridor and the palace, out into the natural silences of the river and the trees and the desert, and finally up into the high silence of the unseen sky, which you know is there but cannot see, a dome of stars and dark air that rests at lot. This layered silence is like the wrappings of a mummy, each band of linen overlapping the one below it to form a protective shell, and you settle into these wrappings, letting each kind of quiet hold you in place, snug and secure, until the boundary between yourself and the stillness becomes as indistinct as the line where the sea meets the sky. You have catalogued not only the types of silence but also the qualities within each type, the subtle variations that distinguish one quiet moment from another. There is the silence of the early watch, when you have just arrived and your footsteps are still echoing in your memory, a silence that is fresh and new and full of the lingering vibrations of movement. There is the silence of the deep night, when the world has been still for so long that the very concept of sound seems foreign, a silence that is thick and settled and almost sleepy in its heaviness. There is the silence just before the torch begins to burn low, a silence that is tinged with a faint restlessness, as if the quiet itself knows that a change is coming. And there is the silence after the torch has been replaced, a renewed silence, a reborn silence that is brighter and cleaner than the one before, like a room that has been swept and aired. You notice the silence that comes when you shift your weight from one leg to the other, the tiny creak of your sandal strap followed by a return to stillness that seems deeper than before, as if the silence needed to be disturbed momentarily in order to be fully appreciated. You notice the silence that accompanies the faint, almost imperceptible cooling of the air as the night progresses, a silence that seems to sharpen and clarify as the temperature drops, the way a winter sky is clearer than a summer one. You notice the silence of your own mind, the gradual stilling of thoughts that happens after you have been standing for a long time, the mental chatter fading into a low hum and then disappearing altogether, leaving a calm, empty space that is the most restful silence of all. All of these silences are yours, catalogued and remembered, and you take a quiet satisfaction in the completeness of your collection, the way a scribe might take satisfaction in a well-ordered archive of papyrus scrolls. You do not speak of this catalogue to anyone, for it would be impossible to explain to someone who has not stood a night watch, who has not felt the slow accumulation of quiet hour by hour. But it is real nonetheless, a secret library of stillness that you carry in your heart and that grows richer with every watch. The time passes in this contemplation of silence, the hours sliding by without any marker except the very small changes in the torch flame and the subtle shift of the shadows, and you remain motionless, listening to the many layers of quiet with an attention that is both relaxed and complete. The Treasury silence presses gently against the door, the corridor silence stretches its hollow length, the palace silence rests like a blanket over the sleeping rooms, the river silence flows on without end, and the desert silence waits at the edge of the world, and all of these silences flow together into a single vast, peaceful quiet that holds you in its embrace. You let yourself be held, not fighting, not thinking, not even breathing deeply, just existing in the center of the stillness as naturally as a stone exists in the bed of a stream, and you feel a profound calm that goes deeper than sleep, a calm that is the absence of all striving, all waiting, all expectation. The night is a temple of silence, and you're its quiet priest, standing vigil before the sealed door, and the hours pass like clouds of incense, slow and silent and full of peace, until the catalogue of silences is complete, and there is nothing left to do but dissolve into the quiet itself, to become one more entry in the inventory, a silence among silences, waiting without urgency for the dawn. Your right hand rests on the shaft of a long wooden spear, its butt placed on the floor beside your foot, and this contact has become so constant over the hours of your watch that you have almost forgotten it is there. The spear stands upright, a vertical line of dark wood against the pale limestone, and your fingers curl around it with a grip that is firm but relaxed, the way a sleeping child holds a toy, not out of need, but out of habit, out of a quiet affection for something familiar and trusted. The wood is acacia, a dense, hard wood that grows along the edges of the desert, its trees twisted and thorny, their roots reaching deep into the dry earth to find water that has not seen the sun for 100 years, and this wood has been cut and shaped and polished until it feels as smooth as riverstone under your palm. The acacia tree from which this shaft was made must have been old, its trunk thick and straight, selected by a craftsman who knew how to read the grain and choose a piece that would not warp or crack. You imagine that tree, standing alone on a rocky rise, its branches spreading wide and low, its small leaves filtering the harsh sunlight into a dappled shade, and you think of the axe that cut it down, the copper blade biting into the hard wood with a sound that echoed across the wadi. That tree is now a memory, its stump long since rotted away or buried by sand, but its essence lives on in the shaft you hold, transformed into an object of service and stillness, a companion to guards through generations of nights. The surface of the wood is polished to a high sheen, not by varnish or oil, but by the countless hands that have held it before yours, each grip rubbing away a microscopic layer of fiber, each shift of weight burnishing the surface a little more, until the shaft has acquired a warm, almost waxy smoothness that is uniquely comforting to the touch. You can feel this smoothness most clearly on the section where your hand rests, a zone about the width of 3 fingers that is slightly lighter in color than the rest of the shaft, because the wood has been worn down past the outer patina to the paler heartwood beneath. This worn spot is perfectly shaped to your grip, as if the spear had been made specifically for you, though in truth it has been shaped by many guards, each one adding their own small contribution to the shallow depression that now cradles your fingers. The weight of the spear is something you notice only when you think about it, because your body has long since adjusted to its presence, compensating for the mass without any conscious effort. The shaft is not heavy, perhaps the weight of a small loaf of bread, but it is solid and dense, the acacia wood having a specific gravity that makes it sink in water, and this density gives the spear a feeling of substance, of reality, that is reassuring in the dark. When you lift the spear slightly, just enough to feel the full weight leave the floor, you sense the mass as a gentle pull on your arm, a downward force that is perfectly balanced by the upward force of your muscles, and this balance is a small physical harmony, a miniature equilibrium that mirrors the larger equilibrium of the night. The bronze spearhead, fixed to the top of the shaft with a tight socket and a bronze pin, is above your line of sight, and you do not look up at it, but you are aware of its presence as a slight downward pull, a top heaviness that makes the spear want to tilt if you loosen your grip even slightly. This pull is a constant reminder that the spear is not merely a staff, but a weapon, an object designed to pierce and cut, that you have never used it for such a purpose and likely never will. The spearhead is a simple leaf-shaped blade, its edges dulled by time and neglect, its surface darkened to a deep brown patina that blends with the shadows of the ceiling, and it rests in its socket with the quiet patience of a snake coiled in a basket, waiting but not expecting. The grain of the wood runs in long, straight lines from the butt to the socket, a pattern of alternating dark and light streaks that are the annual growth rings of the acacia tree, each ring a record of a year of drought or flood, of hot sun or cool wind, of the slow accumulation of fiber that turned a sapling into a mature tree. You have traced these lines with your eyes many times, following them upward from the floor toward the ceiling, and you have noticed how they are perfectly parallel for most of the shaft, but waver slightly near a small knot, a dark oval where a branch once grew before it was trimmed away, and the trunk grew over the wound. This knot is a blemish, a tiny imperfection in the otherwise flawless grain, and you find it beautiful in its honesty, a mark of the tree's life and its struggles, preserved now in the wood as a silent story. Your thumb, moving with a slowness that is almost imperceptible, sometimes follows one of these grain lines, tracing it from the worn spot down toward the butt, then back up again, a journey of a few inches that takes many minutes to complete. The touch is light, barely enough to feel the texture, and the sensation is like reading a text written in a language you cannot understand, but whose meaning you can intuit, a scripture of the tree's history that speaks of sun and soil and the slow patience of growth. This small repetitive motion is soothing, a physical meditation that anchors your awareness in the present moment and prevents your mind from drifting too far into abstraction. The butt of the spear, where it rests on the limestone floor, is capped with a small bronze ferrule, a cup-shaped piece of metal that protects the wood from splintering and provides a firm, non-slip contact with the stone. This ferrule has been worn flat on the bottom by the many hours it has spent in this exact position, and it now has a slight angle that matches the way you hold the spear, tilted just a degree or two toward your body. When you shift the spear slightly, the ferrule makes a soft, dull sound against the stone, a tiny thud that is swallowed immediately by the silence, and you can feel the vibration of that contact travel up the shaft and into your hand, a brief shiver that confirms the solidity of both spear and floor. You have held this spear through many nights, and it has become as familiar to you as your own breath. You know its weight, not as a number, but as a feeling, a pressure on your palm and fingers that has become so integrated into your body image that you might feel a phantom limb if the spear were suddenly taken away. You know the slight bow in the shaft, a deviation of perhaps a finger's width from true straightness that was caused by the drying of the wood long ago, and that is only visible if you sight along the shaft with one eye closed, which you sometimes do in idle moments, checking the straightness as if it mattered, as if the spear needed to be perfectly true to fulfill its symbolic purpose. The spear is not a weapon tonight, only a companion to your watch, something solid and familiar that anchors your hands and gives them a purpose, a reason to remain still. In the daylight, guards carry spears as tools of their trade, instruments of protection and display. But here in the deep night, when there is nothing to protect against except the slow passage of time, the spear becomes something else, a ceremonial object, a reminder of duty, a link in a chain of tradition that stretches back to the first guard who ever stood before a door with a sharpened stick. You are part of that chain now, holding the same shaft that has been held by men whose names are forgotten, and this sense of continuity is a quiet comfort, a feeling that you are not alone even when you are the only living soul in the corridor. The relationship between you and the spear is a silent one, a partnership of stillness, and you treat the spear with the same calm respect you would offer to a fellow guard. When you change your grip, you do so slowly so as not to disturb the balance of the shaft, and when you lift it to move a step, you cradle it gently, the way you might cradle a sleeping child. The spear responds to this care with its own quiet fidelity, standing straight and true without wobbling, its weight distributed perfectly, its surface smooth and cool against your skin, and this mutual reliability creates a bond that is wordless but real, a small friendship in the vast silence of the night. The acacia wood has a faint scent, a dry, slightly spicy aroma that is released when the wood is warmed by your hand, and you notice this scent now, a thin fragrance that rises from the shaft and mixes with the smell of the torch oil and the cool mineral tang of the limestone. The scent is subtle, barely perceptible, but it is there, a ghost of the living tree that persists even after the tree has been cut and shaped and carried far from its native soil, and you breathe it in without thinking, letting it add another layer to the sensory tapestry of the watch. The balance point of the spear is just below the socket, a spot where the weight of the head and the weight of the shaft are perfectly matched, and when you hold the spear at this point, it seems to float in your hand, weightless and effortless, as if gravity had been temporarily suspended. You know this balance point intimately, having found it many times, and you sometimes adjust your grip to place your hand exactly there, feeling the spear become an extension of your arm, a lever of air and wood that moves with your slightest intention. This state of perfect balance is fleeting, because any small movement shifts the center of gravity, but for the moments when you achieve it, you feel a profound sense of harmony, a union of tool and body that is one of the small satisfactions of the guard's life. The spear's shadow on the floor and the wall is another aspect of its presence, a dark double that stretches out from the ferrule and climbs the limestone in a long, distorted line, broken only by the angles of the doorframe and the irregularities of the stone. The shadow is not solid, but slightly blurred at the edges, softened by the diffuse light of the torch, and it moves when the flame moves, swaying in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that is independent of your own stillness. You watch this shadow sometimes, noting how it connects the spear to the rest of the corridor, linking the vertical shaft to the horizontal floor in a continuous band of darkness. And you think about how the shadow is both part of the spear and not part of it, a projection that exists only because of the light, a temporary illusion that will vanish when the torch goes out. The spear has no name, unlike some weapons that are inscribed with the names of their owners or the gods who protect them, and this namelessness makes it more universal, a spear that belongs to no one and to everyone, a tool that has outlasted all its masters and will outlast you as well. You are its temporary custodian, the current link in the chain, and you hold it with the knowledge that one day, long after you have left this post, another guard will stand here with the same spear in his hand, feeling the same smooth wood and the same gentle weight, adding his own small wear to the worn spot on the shaft, continuing the quiet tradition that you have upheld tonight. The stillness of the spear matches the stillness of your body, a vertical immobility that contrasts with the faint, ceaseless motion of the torch flame, and this contrast creates a visual rhythm that is pleasing to your tired eyes, the steady, upright line of the spear, the flickering, dancing line of the flame, the solid, horizontal line of the floor. These three elements form a simple geometry, a triangle of light and wood and stone that is the whole world of your watch, and you rest within this geometry as within a temple, the spear your pillar, the torch your altar, the floor your foundation. You sometimes run your fingers along the shaft, feeling the slight variations in smoothness, the places where the grain is slightly raised, the tiny nicks and scratches that have accumulated over the years, each one a record of a small accident, a bump against a wall, a scrape from a bronze fitting. These imperfections are like the scars on the warrior's body, marks of a long and honorable service, and you touch them with the same gentle respect you would offer to an elder, acknowledging the history they represent without needing to know the details. The spear is old, perhaps older than you are, perhaps older than your father, and it has stood guard through dynasties and floods and the slow shifting of the river's course, and yet it remains straight and strong, faithful to its purpose, a model of endurance that you can only aspire to emulate. The bronze spearhead, though you cannot see it clearly, is a presence you feel through the balance of the shaft, a weight at the top that gives the spear its identity as a spear and not merely a staff. You have seen the spearhead in daylight, during the changing of the guard when the torches are extinguished and the sun seeps through the high ventilation shafts, and you remember its shape, a simple leaf with a raised central rib, the edges beveled and once sharp, now rounded by corrosion and lack of maintenance. The bronze has a greenish patina in places, the verdigris of age, and the socket is wrapped with a band of leather to tighten the fit, a repair made long ago that has held through countless watches. This memory of the spearhead in sunlight is a small treasure, a bright image that you can call up during the dark hours, and it reassures you that the spear is whole and complete even when you cannot see its full length. The hours pass and your hand remains on the spear, the wood warming to the temperature of your skin until there is no difference between the two, and you can no longer tell where your flesh ends and the shaft begins. This blurring of boundaries is a strange and pleasant sensation, a merging of the organic and the crafted that erases the distinction between god and tool, leaving only a single unified stillness that stands before the treasury door. You breathe, and the spear seems to breathe with you, rising and falling with the subtle motion of your chest, though this is an illusion, a trick of perception caused by the close coupling of your hand and the wood. The illusion does not disturb you. It comforts you, reinforcing the sense of partnership that has grown throughout the night. The spear is the most constant thing in your world besides the stone itself, more constant even than the torch, which will eventually burn low and need replacing. The spear does not diminish, does not consume itself, does not change except over scales of time so long that they are imperceptible, and this permanence is a gift, a promise that something in the universe is reliable, that the shaft will still be here when you return for your next watch, waiting in its corner with the patience of the inanimate. You lean into this promise, letting your weight rest partly on the spear, not out of fatigue, but out of a desire for closeness, a wish to share the burden of stillness with something that understands it as well as you do, and the spear accepts your weight without complaint, its acacia fibers compressing by a microscopic amount, its ferrule pressing a little harder into the limestone, its bronze head tilting by a fraction of a degree, and then all is stable again, a new equilibrium established that will last until you shift again. This is the weight of the spear, not the weight you measure in Deben, but the weight of companionship, of tradition, of silent service through the long, quiet watches of the night, and you hold it with the calm certainty that it will hold you in return, a perfect wordless partnership that makes the darkness bearable and the hours light. Behind the sealed door lies the treasury, though you have never entered it and never will, for your duty stops at the threshold and your eyes see only the cedar planks and the electrum seal. Yet over the many nights of your watch you have heard the overseers speak in low voices as they arrived with scribes to inspect the seal or to deposit new wealth, their words carrying fragments of description that you have gathered, like fallen leaves, pressing them together into a calm mental image of the dark space on the other side of the wall. This image is not sharp or detailed like a painter's fresco, but soft and hazy, a dream assembled from hints, a quiet catalogue of treasures that rest in absolute stillness, their existence known to you only through hearsay and your own patient imagination. The treasury room itself, as you have pieced it together, is a rectangular chamber cut into the heart of the palace, its walls of dressed limestone and its floor of the same polished stone as the corridor, but its ceiling lower, perhaps, and its air cooler, sealed away from the circulation that reaches the outer passages. No torch burns inside that room, for fire would be a danger to the linen and the oil, and so the darkness within is complete and ancient, a darkness that has not been disturbed by light since the last time the heavy door was opened and the scribes entered with their oil lamps and their papyrus rolls, counting and recording and then withdrawing, pulling the door shut behind them and pressing the clay seal onto the cord while it was still soft. That darkness is now a positive presence, a thick, velvety black that coats every surface and fills every corner, a darkness so dense that it seems to muffle even the memory of sound. Within this darkness, the first category of treasure that you envision is the gold, the metal that gives the treasury its name and its purpose, though gold is only one of many riches stored here. The gold takes the form of small ingots cast in open molds, their shapes slightly irregular, their surfaces dimpled with the cooling marks of the crucible, each ingot weighing a Deben or two, and stamped with the cartouche of the Pharaoh to certify its purity. These ingots are stacked in neat pyramids inside chests carved from alabaster, a translucent stone the color of honey and cream that glows faintly even in the dark, or would glow if any light fell on it, though of course no light does. The alabaster chests are heavy, their walls thick as a finger, and their lids are carved with the figures of recumbent lions, their manes rendered as rows of tight curls, their eyes closed in eternal sleep, their tails curled around their haunches in a pose of perfect repose. The lions guard the gold in their silent, stony way, and they have done so since the chests were placed here, their carved features never changing, their stone bodies cool and smooth and utterly still. Alongside the ingots, the chests hold rings of twisted gold wire, simple bands without bezels or stones, made by drawing the metal through progressively smaller holes until it became thin enough to bend around a finger, then coiled and snipped and smoothed. These rings are piled loosely, one on top of another, hundreds of them in a single chest, their metal surfaces touching with a faint, silent pressure, and they are so numerous that they fill the alabaster cavity like golden grain. There are also small gold beads pierced through the center and once strung on cords that have long since decayed to dust, now lying loose and scattered, each bead a tiny sphere of polished metal that reflects nothing in the blackness but holds its own inner weight of value and stillness. You picture the gold not with longing or avarice, but with a calm, detached appreciation of its permanence, its refusal to tarnish or decay, its patient waiting in the dark that mirrors your own. The second category in your mental catalogue is the linen, the fine fabric that is the pride of the royal workshops and the currency of trade with distant lands. Bales of this linen, bleached to a pure, even white under the relentless sun, are stacked in towers that reach halfway to the ceiling, each bale wrapped in a protective layer of coarser cloth and tied with palm fiber ropes that have been knotted so tightly they will never loosen on their own. The linen within is of the highest quality, the threads spun so fine that a single layer is nearly transparent, and the weave so dense that it feels smooth as water to the touch, though no one touches it now. The bales are heavy and solid, their weight pressing down on the floor and on the bales beneath them, and the stacked towers rise straight and true, their edges sharp, their surfaces flat, a geometry of textile that has not been disturbed since it was first arranged. The scent of the linen, if any scent remains, is faint and clean, the ghost of the flax fields and the bleaching grounds and the fresh river water used to wash the fibers, all of it now locked away in the dark and the silence. Beside the linen, or perhaps along an adjacent wall, you envision the sacks of grain, the emmer wheat and the barley that form the foundation of all wealth in the land of the river. These sacks are made of thick, coarse linen, stitched shut with heavy thread, and each one bears the royal stamp in black ink, a cartouche surrounded by a border of protective symbols that identify the grain as the property of the Pharaoh and the Treasury. The sacks are large, each containing perhaps 4 hiccat of grain, and they are stacked on their sides in long rows, their shapes bulging slightly where the grain presses outward, their fabric tight and firm, the whole assembly as orderly as a regiment of soldiers. The grain inside is so dry that it has not spoiled in all the years it has rested here. The kernels hard and shriveled, but still viable, still holding the germ of life within their husks, waiting only for water and soil to sprout, though they will never receive either. If a sack were to be shifted, the grains would make a soft hissing sound as they slid against one another, a whisper like sand falling on sand, but no one shifts them, and the hiss remains only a hypothetical noise that you have imagined but never heard. Beyond the grain, you picture the cedar boxes that hold the precious stones and the small amulets, each box a work of craftsmanship in its own right, the wood imported from the mountains of Lebanon, and smelling faintly of the aromatic resin that the living trees exude. The cedar has been planed and joined with tiny wooden pegs, no metal used in the construction, and the lids fit so precisely that no dust can enter. The seam between box and lid a hairline crack that disappears when the lid is pressed down. Inside these boxes, nestled in individual wrappings of raw wool, are the lapis lazuli beads that came from the distant mountains of Bactria. Their color a deep, intense blue, flecked with golden pyrite that sparkles even in the imagination, though no light strikes them now. The beads are carved into the shapes of animals and gods, falcons and scarabs, and the eye of Horus, each one drilled through the center for stringing, though the strings are gone and the beads lie loose in their wool cradles, each one separate and still and perfectly silent. Alongside the lapis, the boxes contain turquoise amulets mined from the Sinai, their color the pale green blue of a shallow sea under a hazy sky. their surfaces polished to a soft luster that feels cool and smooth against the skin, or would feel if any skin touched them. These amulets are carved in the shapes of fish and hippopotami, and the protective goddess Taweret. Their forms simplified and rounded, their features suggested rather than detailed, and they are wrapped in wool that has been dyed a pale brown and that crinkles softly when handled, a sound that no one is there to hear. The turquoise is softer than lapis, more fragile, and it has been stored with extra care, each amulet in its own compartment within the box, separated by thin slats of cedar that prevent them from rubbing against one another, so that they rest in a state of absolute isolation, each one its own small universe of stillness. Other chests, which you have also heard mentioned, hold vessels of electrum and silver, cups and bowls and libation jars that were made for ceremonial use, and then stored away against some future need that has never arrived. These vessels are nested inside one another to save space, the smaller bowls fitting into the larger ones, their metal surfaces separated by scraps of linen so they do not scratch, and they sit in rows on stone shelves that line one wall, their shapes invisible in the dark but their weights and contours known to the scribes who catalogued them. The electrum has the same pale gleam as the inlays on the door, a greenish-yellow alloy that seems to glow with its own inner light, while the silver is brighter and cooler, a moon metal that tarnishes slowly in the air, though the sealed room has so little air movement that the tarnish is minimal, a mere whisper of darkness on the bright surface. There are also, you have gathered, jars of oil sealed with clay stoppers and stamped with the mark of the royal oil presses. Their contents, the pale golden oil of the moringa tree, clear and sweet and stable, used for anointing and for lamps and for the preparation of foods that are never prepared here. The jars stand in rows on the floor, their rounded bottoms set into small depressions in the stone to prevent them from tipping, and the oil inside is perfectly still, its surface a flat, invisible plane that mirrors nothing because there is no light to mirror. The oil is so pure that it will burn without smoke, and you imagine the clean flame it would produce if it were ever ignited, a steady, bright light that would reveal all the other treasures for the first time in centuries, though you know that no such flame will ever be lit because the treasury exists to preserve, not to display. Beyond these major categories, your mental catalogue includes smaller, more miscellaneous items that the overseers mentioned in passing, coils of copper wire, bundles of ostrich feathers, logs of ebony, so dark they seem to absorb the very concept of light, blocks of incense resin wrapped in dried leaves and tied with grass string, their fragrance locked away so completely that not a single molecule escapes into the corridor. All of these objects, diverse as they are, share the same profound stillness, the same patient residence in the dark, the same quiet acceptance of their long sleep, and you picture them arranged with the same orderly precision that the scribes bring to everything they do, each item in its designated place, each place a cell in the great honeycomb of the treasury. The air inside the sealed room, as you imagine it, is cool and dry and very still, its temperature moderated by the thick stone walls that insulate it from the heat of the day and the chill of the night, so that it remains constant throughout the seasons, a perfect environment for preservation. This air has no scent except the faint combined aroma of all the materials within, a complex, subtle perfume that mingles cedar and linen and moringa oil and dry grain and the mineral tang of gold and silver and stone. A scent that is not fragrant in any floral sense, but that has a clean, ancient quality, like the air inside a tomb that has not been opened for 1,000 years. You will never breathe that air, for the door remains sealed, but you can almost sense it as a faint exhalation that seeps through the tiny gap between the cedar planks, a whisper of the treasury's atmosphere that reaches your nostrils and adds another layer to the sensory inventory of your watch. You picture the treasures one by one, not with desire, but with a kind of quiet reverence for their stillness, their patient waiting in the dark that mirrors your own, and you feel a kinship with these objects that you have never seen and never will see, a bond forged by the shared experience of standing motionless through the long, quiet hours. The gold and the linen and the grain and the stones are all doing what you are doing, which is nothing at all except existing, remaining in place, holding themselves in readiness for a morning that never comes, and this common purpose links you to them across the barrier of the sealed door, as surely as if you were in the room with them, a fellow occupant of the Treasury's eternal present. The thought does not fill you with excitement or longing or any sharp emotion. It simply settles over you, like a soft, heavy blanket, adding its weight to the quiet satisfaction that already fills your chest, and you stand a little straighter, a little stiller, knowing that you are not alone in the dark. Time does not hurry here, and you have long since stopped expecting it to do so. The night stretches out before you and behind you, a vast, placid ocean of darkness through which you drift without oars or sails, carried by a current too slow to perceive. You track the passing of the hours not by any clock or water timer, for those belong to the scribes and the overseers who work in the daylight, but by small, almost imperceptible signs that require patience and stillness to notice. The kind of signs that reveal themselves only to someone who has learned to look at the world with the slow, calm attention of a heron standing motionless in the shallows of the river. The lowering of the oil in the torch's reservoir is one such sign, a change so gradual that you cannot see it happening, only infer it after many heartbeats by comparing the current level to a memory of the level that existed a while ago. The clay cup that holds the oil is a simple vessel, unglazed and porous, darkened by years of use, and its inner surface has a tide mark where the oil once reached at the beginning of your watch. Over time, that line becomes visible as a faint dark stain above the diminishing liquid, and the distance between the line and the oil surface grows by increments smaller than a fingernail's thickness, each increment taking many minutes to achieve. You do not measure this distance with any tool. You simply note, in a calm, passive way, that the oil is lower now than it was when you last thought about it. And this recognition passes through your mind as quietly as a leaf floating down a stream. The cooling of the stone at your back provides another marker of time's slow advance, a sensation that deepens as the hours slip by, the limestone surrendering the last residual warmth it absorbed during the day, when the sun beat down on the outer walls and the heat traveled slowly inward through the massive masonry, a journey that took many hours and that now reverses itself as the night chill penetrates from the outside. When you first took your position, the wall felt neutral against your spine, neither warm nor cold, a mild, unobtrusive presence that you barely noticed. As the night matures, the stone becomes cooler, then cool, then almost cold, its temperature descending with the same leisurely slowness that characterizes everything in this place, and you feel the change as a gentle, persistent pressure that seeps through the linen of your tunic and into the muscles of your back, a reminder that the world outside this corridor is dark and still and losing its heat to the vast, starry void overhead. The cooling is not unpleasant. It is the natural rhythm of the earth, the exhalation of the day, and you accept it as you accept all the other small changes, without resistance, without judgment, simply noting that the wall is cooler now than it was before. Your breathing, which you return to again and again as a reference point in the quiet, keeps its own slow rhythm, a personal measure of time that is as old as your life and as constant as the river. You breathe in, and the air fills your lungs with a gentle expansion. Then you breathe out, and the air leaves in a soft stream, each cycle taking perhaps the time needed to count to 15, though you do not count with numbers, but with a wordless sense of duration, an internal music that plays without melody. The pauses between breaths, those tiny gaps where nothing happens at all, are as much a part of the rhythm as the breaths themselves, little rests in the quiet song of your body, and you notice them now with a mild curiosity, seeing how they lengthen slightly as your body relaxes deeper into the watch. There is no need to control the breath or to alter it. It proceeds on its own, a faithful servant that requires no orders, and you let it carry you along from one moment to the next, a gentle tide that marks the passage of the night without demanding your attention. Beyond the walls of the corridor, the palace sleeps in its entirety, every chamber and hall and courtyard wrapped in the same profound stillness that enfolds you, and this collective slumber deepens as the hours advance, the last small sounds of the early night having faded into memory. The servants have long since ceased their quiet movements. The cooks have banked their fires and retired, the scribes have rolled up their papyri and extinguished their lamps, and now even the guards at the outer gates have settled into the motionless trance of their own watches, their eyes gazing out at the moonlit desert or the dark ribbon of the river, their spears held loosely, their thoughts as slow and sparse as yours. No footsteps echo in the halls above you. No voices murmur behind closed doors. No distant cough or laugh or cry disturbs the fabric of the silence. The entire palace has become a single silent entity, a great sleeping beast of stone and timber that breathes through its ventilation shafts and dreams through its darkened windows, and you are one small part of that entity, a nerve ending on its periphery, awake while the rest slumbers, keeping watch over the dreams of the Pharaoh and his treasury. The stars, which you cannot see from this windowless passage, have already moved a hand's width across the sky, and you imagine their slow turning as a vast, silent wheel that rotates around the pivot of the celestial pole, the constellations following their ancient paths with a precision that has never faltered. You know the night sky from your own nights outside the palace, when you slept on the roof or walked along the riverbank before your duties began, and you can picture the current arrangement of the stars as clearly as if you were standing under them. The leg of the giant constellation stretching across the southern horizon, the bright star of the goddess rising in the east, the dimmer stars of the northern sky circling the point that never moves. The wheel turns, and the stars climb and descend, and the darkness between them remains constant, a black velvet backdrop for their slow, luminous procession, and this celestial motion is the ultimate clock, the one that governs all the others, the one that has measured the nights of Egypt since before the first stone of the first pyramid was laid. You feel a quiet kinship with that wheel, its steady, unhurried rotation matching the steady, unhurried pace of your own watch, and you let your thoughts drift upward through the layers of stone and roof and sky until they mingle with the starlight, a brief imaginary ascent that leaves you feeling expanded and peaceful. The night is a long, flat expanse with no events to mark it. No sudden sounds or changes, no arrivals or departures, only the gentle accumulation of very small perceptions that drift into your awareness and then drift out again, leaving no trace except a faint sense of having noticed something. You notice the way a shadow on the doorframe has shifted by a finger's width as the torch flame moved, the new position holding steady for an hour before shifting again. A slow, pendular dance that charts the subtle currents of air in the corridor. You notice the distant, muffled creak of a timber settling somewhere far above you, a sound so faint that it might have been a memory or a dream, the old wood of the roof beams adjusting to the cooling of the night, releasing tensions that built up during the heat of the day, and then all is silent again. You notice the monotone thing of a crack in the limestone wall near the floor, a hairline fissure that you have observed many times before and that seems, though you cannot be certain, to have extended itself by a tiny fraction, the stone responding to the immense, slow pressures of the building's weight. A geological process that operates on a scale of centuries, but that you, in your stillness, are privileged to glimpse in its infinitesimal increments. These small perceptions are not distractions. They are the substance of the watch, the fine grain of the night, and you gather them as a farmer gathers fallen fruit, without urgency, without purpose beyond the gathering itself. Each one is a small confirmation that the world is continuing, that the slow progress of the hours is real, that you are present and aware in a place where presence and awareness are the only requirements. The night does not ask you to do anything other than be here, and you fulfill that request fully, giving yourself over to the quiet, letting the hours wash over you like the gentle lapping of water against the riverbank. The oil level in the torch continues its imperceptible descent, and the flame, though still bright and steady, has begun to show the first subtle signs of the change to come, a barely noticeable deepening of its orange hue, a slight lengthening of its tip, a faint increase in the frequency of its small flickers. These signs tell you that the night is past its midpoint, that the deepest part of the darkness is approaching, the time when the world outside is at its coldest and most silent, the time when the river mists rise from the water and the desert foxes begin their slow return to their dens. You have been here through many such midpoints, and you know their character, a profound stillness that seems to intensify for an hour or two, a sense that the entire cosmos is holding its breath, waiting for the first hint of dawn. During this time, the small sounds of the palace become even fewer, the settling of the timbers ceases, the distant rustle of a bird in a roof cavity fades, and the silence reaches a density that is almost tangible, a presence that you could almost wrap around yourself like a cloak. Your body too responds to this deepening of the night, your heart rate slowing to its lowest point, your muscles becoming so relaxed that you feel almost dissolved into the stone, your thoughts becoming so thin and transparent that they are like the faintest wisps of cloud in a summer sky. The boundary between yourself and the corridor blurs, and for long stretches you are not a guard standing before a door, but simply a part of the stillness, a concentration of awareness in a sea of quiet, no different in essence from the spear or the torch or the limestone blocks. This state of dissolution is not frightening or disorienting. It is profoundly restful, a release from the ordinary burdens of selfhood, and you inhabit it with the same calm acceptance that you bring to everything in the watch. The hours continue their slow, majestic march, and you continue to track them by the signs that present themselves: the flame, the stone, the breath, the stars, the shadows, the silence. The night is not a problem to be solved, or a challenge to be overcome. It is simply a fact, a condition, a long, flat, peaceful terrain that you traverse at the pace of a single step per hour, moving without moving, traveling without moving, traveling without journeying, arriving continuously at the same still point that you have never left. The slow progress of the hours is the slow progress of your own being toward a dawn that will arrive in its own time, and until then there is nothing to do but stand and wait and watch the small quiet signs of the night's passage, one after another, without haste, without expectation, in perfect patient peace. Your attention, which has wandered across the stone floor, the hieroglyphs, the torch, the spear, and the imagined treasures, now returns without effort to the most constant companion of the watch, the one that has been with you since your first breath and will remain with you until your last, your own breathing. It is the quiet engine of your stillness, a soft, continuous rhythm that underlies every other perception, and you settle into its familiar pattern as a boat settles into the gentle current of the river. The breath has been there all along, a background hum that you rarely notice unless you deliberately turn your mind toward it. And now, as the night deepens and the external world offers no new distractions, you allow your awareness to rest on the simple, miraculous process of drawing air into your body and releasing it again. You inhale through your nose, the air cool and dry, faintly flavored with the oil smoke from the torch and the ancient dust of the corridor, and the sensation is a thin, steady stream that passes over the rim of your nostrils and down the back of your throat, a path so well traveled that you could map it with your eyes closed. The air is not cold enough to sting, not warm enough to feel. It carries the temperature of the room, a neutral coolness that blends seamlessly with the interior of your body, and as it descends into your lungs, your chest rises a small amount, the linen of your tunic stretching slightly across your ribs, the fabric pulling against the slight resistance of the weave. The rise is gentle, a slow inflation that takes a few heartbeats to complete, and you feel the expansion not only in your chest, but also in your belly, where the diaphragm flattens and presses downward, creating a soft, internal pressure that is both subtle and profound. This inward breath is a small act of gathering, a drawing in of the world around you, and you take it without grasping, without clinging, simply observing as the air fills the spaces inside you and then begins its quiet return. The exhalation follows without hurry, a natural release that requires no effort, the air flowing out through your nose in a stream as steady and soft as the one that entered, carrying with it the warmth of your body and the faint, altered scent of your own interior. Your chest falls slowly, the linen relaxing against your skin, the stretched fibers returning to their rest, and the sensation is one of gentle settling, a small letting go that mirrors the larger letting go of the night. The sound of your breath is barely audible, a soft tide at the very edge of hearing, a whisper so close to silence that it might be mistaken for the rustle of the torch or the distant imagined murmur of the river. But it is there, a constant hushing presence that accompanies the in and out, like the sound of a calm sea heard from a great distance. You listen to this sound without trying to change it, accepting its quiet rhythm as a gift, a lullaby sung by your own body to keep you company in the dark. Between the out-breath and the next in-breath, there is a short pause, a tiny gap where nothing at all happens, a suspension of the cycle that is as restful as sleep itself. In this gap, your body hovers in a state of perfect equilibrium, neither filling nor emptying, and the silence of the corridor seems to deepen, as if the world itself is holding its breath along with you. The pause is brief, perhaps only a second or two, but within that sliver of time there is an infinite stillness, a quiet space where thoughts do not intrude and the boundaries of self become fuzzy and indistinct. You notice this pause without analyzing it, simply resting in its calm emptiness, and when the next breath begins, it arrives not as an interruption but as a gentle continuation, the tide turning as softly as a leaf changing direction on still water. Your heartbeat, steady and slow, keeps a pace that matches the flicker of the torch, a deep internal drum that has been beating since long before you were born, and will continue until long after you are gone, though tonight it seems to beat only for the duration of this watch. You feel the pulse not as a sound, but as a subtle pressure in your chest, a faint throb that resonates through your torso and into your limbs, and if you pay close attention, you can detect its echo in your fingertips where they rest on the shaft of the spear, a tiny, rhythmic thump transmitted through the wood and into your skin. The pulse is slightly slower than your breath, perhaps 4 or 5 beats for each full cycle of inhalation and exhalation, and the two rhythms weave together like the strands of a rope, a counterpoint of life that has played without cease since the moment you arrived at your post. The warmth of your breath, slight as it is, creates a tiny microclimate around your face, a thin envelope of air that is a fraction warmer than the surrounding corridor, and you can sense this warmth as a faint, diffuse sensation on your cheeks and upper lip, especially during the exhalation when the heated air streams outward. The contrast with the cool stone and the chill of the floor is subtle but noticeable, a small reminder that you are a living creature in a place of mineral stillness, a source of heat and motion in a world that has otherwise surrendered to the cold. This warmth does not spread far, it dissipates almost immediately, absorbed by the vast cool mass of the palace, but while it lasts, it is a private comfort, a small hearth that you carry with you wherever you go. As you continue to attend to your breathing, you become aware of the way it interacts with the other rhythms of the night, the flicker of the torch, and the minute tremors of the spear, and the slow, steady settling of the building. The flame, with its soft, dancing motion, seems to pulse in time with your breath, though this is an illusion, a trick of attention that links disparate phenomena into a single, harmonious whole. When you inhale, the flame might dip slightly, responding to the faint current of air you draw toward yourself, and when you exhale, it might rise again, a gentle seesaw that you can influence without intending to. The spear, too, seems to share your rhythm, its minute vibrations traveling up the shaft and into your hand in a pattern that matches your heartbeat, the wood acting as a conductor of the tiny internal drum. The stone walls, cold and inert, offer a contrasting stillness, a baseline of silence against which your living rhythms stand out like a figure on a vast empty plain, and the interplay of these elements, breath, pulse, flame, stone, creates a quiet symphony that only you can hear. The breath, you realize, is not merely a bodily function, but a thread that connects you to everything else in the corridor. A gentle, continuous exchange between your interior world and the exterior darkness, a bridge made of air and warmth, and the faint, clean scent of your own being. With each inhalation, you draw the room into yourself, taking in the molecules that have drifted from the sealed treasury, the stone dust of the floor, the oil vapor from the torch, and you make them briefly part of you before releasing them again, transformed by the passage through your lungs. With each exhalation, you give something back, a small offering of warmth and moisture and the carbon dioxide that the plants outside will one day use to build their leaves, a cycle that links you to the fields and the river and the distant forests of the mountains, though none of that is visible here. This sense of connection is not a thought so much as a feeling, a quiet, expansive awareness that your breathing is a part of the world's breathing, a single note in a song that has been sung since the beginning of time. The rhythm of your breath, slow and steady, begins to lull you into a state that is not sleep, but a kind of waking trance, a deep, calm plateau where your thoughts become thin and transparent, like the surface of a pond on a windless day. You no longer track the individual breaths as separate events, but perceive them as a continuous flowing stream, a river of air that moves through you without beginning or end, and you are content to float on this river, carried along by its gentle current, asking no questions, seeking no destinations. The pauses between breaths, those tiny gaps of stillness, grow slightly longer. As your body relaxes further, the nervous system settling into its most restful state, and you welcome these pauses as small vacations from the effort of living, brief returns to the primordial silence from which all things emerge. Your lips are slightly parted, the lower jaw relaxed, and the air can pass through both your nose and your mouth, though the mouth root is mostly unused, the lips closed enough to keep the moisture inside, but not so tight as to create tension. You can feel the coolness of the air on your tongue when you inhale through the mouth, a faint dry chill that contrasts with the warmth of the exhalation. And this small sensory detail adds another layer to the rich tapestry of the breath, a texture that you note and then release, letting it drift away like a leaf on the stream. The skin around your nostrils, sensitive and thin, registers the passage of air with a delicate precision. The tiny hairs inside the nose bending and straightening in the current, a microscopic dance that you cannot see but can faintly feel as a tickle at the very threshold of sensation. This tickle is so subtle that it does not provoke a response. You do not need to scratch or rub, simply to notice and then let it be, as you let all things be, during this long, quiet watch. The sensation is a reminder that your body is a living instrument, tuned to the smallest stimuli, and that even in the deepest stillness, life continues its quiet, relentless work. The rhythm of the breath begins to synchronize with the slow, almost imperceptible changes in the torch flame, the two cycles locking into a pattern that feels as ancient and inevitable as the phases of the moon. When the flame brightens slightly, you might be at the peak of an inhalation, and when it dims, you might be at the trough of an exhalation. That this correlation is not fixed but fluid, a dance in which you and the fire are partners moving to the same silent music. The spear, too, joins this dance, its shadow on the wall shifting in time with your pulse, a dark, wavering line that seems to breathe along with you. And the whole corridor becomes a single, integrated system, a clockwork of light and shadow and air and wood and stone that ticks with a rhythm so slow it can only be perceived by someone who has become as still as the stone itself. You let yourself sink deeper into this rhythm, not by effort, but by surrender, allowing the breath to carry you as the river carries a floating lotus, and you feel the boundaries of your body soften and blur, the distinction between inside and outside becoming as fuzzy as the edge of a shadow. The breath is both yours and not yours, an impersonal force that moves through you the way the wind moves through a reed, and you are simply the hollow space through which it passes, a channel for the great respiration of the world, and this realization brings with it a profound peace, a sense of belonging that has no need for words or thoughts, or even the awareness of self. The night moves on, and your breath continues its quiet, steady work, a faithful servant that asks no wages and expects no thanks, and you continue to watch it with a gentle, detached attention, not clinging to the pleasant sensations, not pushing away the subtle discomforts, simply observing the flow as it comes and goes, a tide that washes through you with the same patience and persistence as the river washing against the ancient stone embankments. The cool air enters, the warm air leaves, the pause extends, the cycle repeats, and each repetition is both the same as the last and entirely new, a fresh creation that has never happened before and will never happen again. A miracle so ordinary that it is easy to overlook, but tonight, in the deep stillness of the Pharaoh's corridor, you do not overlook it, and you give it the full, calm attention it deserves until the breath and the watcher become one, and there is only the breathing, and the quiet, and the night. Sometime deep in the night, the first torch begins to burn low, its flame shrinking from the bright gold you have watched for so long into a deeper, more sluggish orange, its shape less pointed and more rounded, as if the fire itself is growing tired. You have been aware of this change coming for a while now, the slow, patient signals accumulating in your peripheral awareness. And when the moment arrives, it does not surprise you or interrupt your stillness, but simply presents itself as the next quiet task in the long sequence of the watch. The oil in the reservoir cup has fallen to a thin, dark layer, no thicker than your smallest finger, and the reed, now mostly consumed, has shortened by the width of your hand, its blackened tip crumbling into ash that drifts down to the floor in a fine grey powder. The light has dimmed perceptibly, the shadows on the door and the walls deepening and softening, the hieroglyphs retreating into the gloom, and the corridor, which was once a warm chamber of golden glow, has become a place of soft, amber twilight. You know the routine without thinking about it, the series of small, calm actions that have been performed by guards in this corridor since the first torch was placed in the bracket generations ago, and you move to perform them now with the same unhurried grace that you bring to every aspect of the watch. You shift your weight, feeling the slight stiffness in your legs after the long stillness, and you take a step across the corridor, your sandals making the only sound. A soft, brushing whisper against the limestone that is immediately swallowed by the silence. The spear, still in your right hand, moves with you, its ferrule lifting from the floor and then touching down again as you complete the step, a small muted tap that echoes once and is gone. The distance from your post to the torch is only a few paces, but you cover it slowly, savoring the sensation of movement after so many hours of immobility, the gentle flex of your knees and ankles, the subtle stretch of the muscles in your back and shoulders. Beside the torch bracket, set into a shallow niche in the wall, is a clay pot of the kind used for storing oil and torches, its surface rough and unglazed, its rim darkened by years of handling. Inside this pot, a bundle of fresh reed torches stands upright, their bases submerged in oil so that they are fully saturated and ready to burn, their tops protruding above the rim like a cluster of dry stalks in a field. The oil in the pot has a faint, sweet scent, stronger than the burning oil of the old torch, and you breathe it in as you reach down and select one of the reeds, your fingers closing around its smooth, cool surface. The reed is heavier than it looks, dense with oil, and it drips a few dark drops onto the floor as you lift it, tiny splashes that bead on the limestone and then slowly spread, darkening the stone in small irregular circles. You hold the fresh torch carefully, keeping it upright so that the oil does not run down your arm. And you turn back toward the bracket where the old flame still dances its weary, diminished dance. The old torch, with its shortened reed and its guttering flame, is still burning, and you do not extinguish it yet. Instead, you bring the tip of the fresh reed close to the dying flame, holding it at a slight angle so that the oil-soaked fibers can catch the heat. For a moment, nothing happens. The fresh reed smokes faintly, a thin, grey wisp that curls upward and merges with the soot from the old flame. Then, with a soft, almost silent puff, the new torch ignites, a fresh, bright flame springing to life with a vigor that makes the old flame look pale and exhausted by comparison. The new flame is taller and more golden, its blue base broader, its tip pointed and steady, and it fills the corridor with a sudden wash of light that seems to push the shadows back by a full pace in every direction. You hold the new torch for a few seconds, watching it settle into a steady burn, ensuring that the oil is flowing properly and the flame is not smoking excessively, and then you turn to the bracket to complete the exchange. The old torch, still burning weakly, is lifted from the iron bracket with a careful grip, the heat of the metal arms felt as a faint warmth through the reed. You carry the spent stub, no longer than your hand, across to the far corner of the corridor, where a large clay pot filled with dry sand serves as the extinguisher. This sandpot is a simple, practical object, its surface rough and unadorned, its contents a fine, pale sand that was brought from the riverbank many years ago and has been used to quench countless torches since. You lower the old reed into the sand, pressing it down gently until the flame is smothered and the last ember dies with a soft, brief hiss, a sound like a small breath of relief. The sand absorbs the remaining oil, darkening around the reed, and you leave the stub there, standing upright in the sand like a grave marker for the fire that has kept you company through the first half of the night. Later, a servant will collect the spent stubs and replace them with fresh ones, but you do not think about that now. Your task is complete. You return to the bracket with the new torch, now burning brightly in your hand, its flame strong and clean, and you place it into the iron arms with the same careful precision that you use for everything in this place. The reed settles into the curve of the bracket with a faint, satisfying click, and the flame, now supported and stable, rises straight and tall, its light flooding the corridor with a renewed golden warmth that makes the limestone glow and the electrum on the door sparkle. You step back, returning to your post 2 paces from the Treasury door, and you resume your stance as if you had never moved. Your back to the cool wall, your spear held easily at your side, your eyes adjusting to the brighter light. The whole procedure, from the first step to the last, has taken only a small amount of time. A quiet interlude in the vast, silent symphony of the night, and now it is over, leaving no trace except the faint scent of fresh oil and the distant memory of the old flame that has gone to its rest. The new torch burns with a clarity and steadiness that the old torch, in its final hours, could not match, and you notice the difference not as an improvement, but as a shift in the character of the light, a change from the mellow, tired glow of late night to the crisp, alert brightness of the middle watch. The shadows on the door are sharper now, the edges of the hieroglyphs more defined, and the colors of the corridor, the cream of the limestone, the dark brown of the cedar, the pale green gold of the electrum, are all more vivid, as if the world has been washed clean by the new light. You can see the fine details that had been lost in the dimness, the tiny grains of the limestone, the small chip in the bronze band near the floor, the faint, hairline crack in the clay seal that has been there for as long as you can remember and that has never widened, a testament to the stability of the sealed room. The hissing sound of the new torch is slightly different from the old one, a little louder and more lively, a crisp, energetic whisper that speaks of fresh oil and a full reservoir, and you listen to this new voice with the same calm attention you gave to the old one, accepting it as the natural sound of this part of the night. The smell of the new flame is also slightly different, less acrid and more sweet, the scent of oil that has not yet been heated and broken down by hours of burning, and this fresh scent mingles with the older, deeper smells of the corridor, creating a layered fragrance that is complex and pleasing in an understated way. The replacement of the torch is a small act, a minor task that you perform once or twice each night, but it carries with it a quiet significance, a reminder that the watch is a cycle, a rhythm of light and darkness and light again, of old fires dying and new fires being born, of the continuous unbroken chain of attention that keeps the treasury safe. You think of the guards who have performed this same ritual before you, their hands reaching for the same clay pot, their faces lit by the same fresh flame, their minds as calm and empty as yours, and you feel a sense of connection to them, a link in the long human chain that stretches back into the depths of time. The torch, in its small, unassuming way, is a symbol of continuity, a flame that has never gone out, passed from reed to reed, from guard to guard, from generation to generation, and you are its current keeper, its temporary guardian, a steward of the light, until the next guard arrives to take your place. With the new torch burning steadily, you settle back into the deep stillness of the watch, the brief activity of the replacement fading into memory, and you let the fresh light wash over you, warm and golden and calm. The corridor is quiet again. The only sounds the whisper of the flame and the soft tide of your own breathing. And you stand as you have stood for hours, motionless and patient, a guard before the sealed door, waiting for the slow turn of the night to bring the dawn. The final hours of the watch are the deepest, when the world outside the palace is at its coldest and most silent, and even the small sounds of the building have ceased, leaving a stillness so profound that it seems to press against your ears like the weight of water at the bottom of a deep well. The new torch has settled into its steady burn, its flame no longer the bright, eager fire of its first moments, but a mature, unwavering glow that fills the corridor with a constant golden light, and you stand in this light as you have stood for the whole night, motionless and calm, your spear held loosely at your side, your back against the cool stone wall. The oil in the new torch's reservoir is still high, and you know that it will burn for many hours yet, long past the end of your watch, and into the daylight hours when the corridor will be filled with the footsteps of scribes and overseers, though you will not be here to see it. The sense of the whole night above you is a palpable thing now, a weight that presses down gently but without threat, the accumulated hours of darkness and silence and stillness that have built up since the sun set over the western desert. You feel the miles of stone above you, the thick roofs of the palace chambers, the massive blocks of the upper walls, the heavy lintels of the doorways, all of it resting on the foundations that rest on the bedrock that rests on the earth's deep crust, and you feel the dark sky beyond that, the vast, starry expanse that covers the land like a bowl, its blackness absolute and its silence complete. The weight of all of this is not a burden, but a comfort, a firm, steady pressure that holds you in place, that anchors you to the floor and to the moment, and you lean into it slightly, letting it support you as the wall supports your back. Your thoughts have become thin and transparent by now, like water smoothed by a long calm, the ripples of the early watch having faded away until the surface of your mind is a perfect, unbroken mirror that reflects nothing but the present moment. Words have lost their meaning, their sharp edges worn away by the hours of stillness, and concepts like time and duty and self have dissolved into a gentle haze, leaving only a pure, wordless awareness of the corridor, the door, the flame, the spear, the breath. You are not thinking about anything in particular. You are simply being, existing in the quiet center of the night, a presence that is aware of its own presence without needing to name it or claim it. This state is not sleep, though it is as restful as sleep, and it is not waking, though you are fully conscious of your surroundings. It is a third thing, a calm, alert stillness that has no name in any language, a gift that the night gives to those who wait patiently in the dark. You are aware of the treasury door behind you, unchanging and sealed, its cedar planks and electrum inlays and clay impression exactly as they were when you arrived, their details now so familiar that you could reproduce them from memory with your eyes closed. The treasures inside the room, the gold and the linen and the grain and the stones, are still asleep in their boxes and sacks, their silence unbroken, their patience infinite, and you feel a quiet kinship with them, a sense of shared purpose in this long, motionless vigil. The door is the center of your world, the fixed point around which the slow rotation of the night has turned, and you stand before it like a statue before an altar, a silent guardian whose only duty is to be present, to be still, to wait. Somewhere beyond the walls, far beyond the stone and the darkness and the sleeping palace, the first grey light of dawn is gathering, though you cannot see it from your windowless corridor. You know it is there, a faint, cold luminescence that is beginning to seep over the eastern horizon, turning the black sky to a deep, velvety blue, and then to a pale, pearly grey, a slow, majestic transition that has been happening every morning since the world was made, and that will continue to happen long after you are gone. The stars, which have been wheeling overhead all night, are beginning to fade, their brightness dimmed by the approaching sun, and the constellations that you know so well are sinking toward the western horizon, their long journey nearly complete. You picture this dawn in your mind, the thin line of light on the edge of the desert, the gradual illumination of the river, the first stirring of the birds in the palm trees, the cool, fresh breeze that springs up as the air begins to warm, and the image is so vivid and so peaceful that it feels almost like a memory, a dream of a morning that has already arrived, even though it is still on its way. The palace, too, will soon begin to stir, the sleepers in their chambers turning on their mats, the cooks rising to light the kitchen fires, the scribes gathering their papyri and their ink, the overseers making their rounds to inspect the seals and the stores. The corridor will fill with footsteps and voices, the heavy cedar door will be examined and found secure, and your watch will end as quietly as it began. The next guard arriving to take your place, his sandals brushing the same stone floor, his hand gripping the same acacia spear. You will walk back through the long passageways, past the statue of Thoth and the sealed storerooms, and you will emerge into the pale light of early morning. The cool air on your face, the sound of the river in your ears, the long night behind you like a dream that fades with each step. But all of that is still in the future, still distant, still unreal, and for now the only reality is the corridor, the flame, the door, and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath. You remain motionless, patient, and entirely at peace, with nothing to do but stand and let the night finish its course in perfect quiet. The minutes slip by, one after another, each one identical to the last and yet entirely new. A succession of present moments that flow into one another like the waters of a slow, deep river, and you are carried along on this current without resistance, without effort, without any desire to change anything. The stillness holds you in its gentle embrace, and you give yourself to it completely, letting go of the last small threads of thought and awareness, dissolving into the quiet as a drop of water dissolves into the sea, until there is no guard, and no door, and no torch, only the silent, peaceful presence of the night itself, waiting with infinite patience for the coming of the dawn. The first hint of grey light, when it finally arrives, is so faint and so gradual that you do not notice it at first, a subtle change in the quality of the darkness at the far end of the corridor, a slight thinning of the shadows that might be an illusion of your tired eyes. But as the minutes pass, the change becomes clearer, a pale, diffuse glow that seeps through the high ventilation shafts from somewhere above, a light that is not yellow like the torch but cool and silver, the color of water and stone and the underside of leaves. This light grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, spreading down the corridor like a thin, clear liquid, its arrival so gentle that it does not disturb the silence but simply blends with it, the way milk blends with water, until the corridor is no longer a place of darkness and fire, but a place of cool, shadowless illumination. The torch, which has been the center of your world for so many hours, begins to look dim and yellow by comparison, its light no longer necessary, its flame still burning steadily, but now just a small bright point in the growing brightness of the day. You feel the change in the air as well, a faint shift in the temperature, a slight warming that is the first sign of the sun's heat beginning to penetrate the outer walls, and you smell the change. A freshening of the air as the ventilation shafts draw in the cool, clean breeze from outside, a breeze that carries the scent of the river and the damp fields and the distant desert. The night is over, though you did not see it end, and the long stillness of your watch is drawing to a close, its final moments as quiet and as peaceful as all the moments that came before. You stand in the growing light, your spear in your hand, your back to the wall, and you wait for the sound of footsteps that will tell you the next guard is on his way, and you feel a quiet gratitude for the night, for the silence, for the simple, patient task of standing still and watching over the sleeping treasures until the world woke up again.